The surgical ward at 6:14 a.m. is the kind of quiet that only lasts minutes. The overnight staff are wrapping up. The day shift hasn't fully arrived. The hallway lights are still on their dim setting, and the only sound is the soft beep of monitors and the occasional squeak of a rubber sole on linoleum. Dr. Renee Caldwell is already there. She is standing at the nurse's station in her coat, a patient chart open in front of her, a pen moving slowly down the page. She hadn't gone home the night before until after midnight. She was back by 5:30. Nobody asked her to be. Nobody noticed. She just came. Down the corridor, the chief's office door is open about 4 inches. Renee isn't paying attention to it. She is focused on the chart, post-op patient in room 7, vitals from the 4 a.m. check, a note from the night resident she wants to follow up on. Her eyes move line by line. Then she hears the voice. It belongs to Director Kong Sejin. She knows it without looking up. Calm, low, the kind of voice that never has to get loud because it has never had to. He owns 38% of Hallmark General Hospital. He bought in 14 months ago and has been quietly reshaping everything since: staff structures, vendor contracts, department budgets. The hospital chief talks to him the way people talk to someone who holds the keys. Sejin is saying something about the new intake numbers. Then there is a pause. Then one sentence, unhurried, almost casual. She's too confident for a probationary hire. Find a reason before her 90 days are up. Renee's pen does not stop. Her eyes do not lift from the page. She reads the same line in the chart 3 times without taking in a single word. Then she breathes, slow, quiet, and moves to the next line. Her face gives nothing. Her hand gives nothing. She stands there and keeps working like the words never reached her. But they did. Dana Price has been a nurse coordinator at Hallmark General for 12 years. She has seen things in this hospital that would make your stomach turn, not medical things, people things. The quiet politics. The way certain doctors get protected and others get picked apart. She has watched 4 physicians rotate through this ward in 3 years. 2 left on their own. 1 was pushed. 1 simply disappeared from the schedule one Friday and was never mentioned again. Dana noticed Renee Caldwell on her very first day. Not because Renee made a big entrance. She didn't. It was the opposite. Renee walked in, found her assigned locker, changed, picked up her patient list, and got to work. No small talk, no performance. But Dana watched her move through the ward and saw something she hadn't seen in a while. Renee stopped at beds. Not just to check vitals or update a chart. She actually stopped. She looked at the patient. She asked questions that weren't on any form. She stayed 2 hours past her shift that first week to sit with a post-op case the residents had already handed off. The patient was 63 years old, scared, and alone. Renee stayed until the woman fell asleep. Dana knows Renee has twin girls at home, 7 years old. She knows Renee rents an apartment 40 minutes away and that she drives a car with a cracked side mirror she hasn't fixed yet. She knows this job isn't a stepping stone for Renee. It is the floor she is standing on. So when Renee walks back from the direction of that office, sets a chart down, and picks up the next one without a word, Dana watches. She doesn't ask. She doesn't say a thing. Neither does Renee. The tour was announced the day before through a single email. No details, just a time and a request that the ward be presentable for a director's walkthrough. Everyone knew what that meant. By 8:30 the next morning, the nurse's station was tidied, the supply carts were pushed to the walls, and the department head, Dr. Marcus Webb, was standing near the ward entrance in a fresh tie, checking his phone every 2 minutes. Sejin arrived at 8:45. He came with 2 senior administrators, a man named Pritchard from the finance office and a woman named Holloway from operations. They walked in like a unit, Sejin in the middle, the other 2 just half a step behind on either side. Nobody was loud about it. Nobody made a show. But the shape of it was clear. This was not a visit. This was an inspection. Dana was at the nurse's station when they came in. She kept her eyes on her screen, but she was watching everything. Dr. Webb moved towards Sejin immediately, hand already extended, smile already in place. He started talking before Sejin had fully stopped walking. Patient numbers, bed occupancy, the new scheduling system they had rolled out last month. Sejin listened with his hands clasped in front of him. He nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they are not really listening but want you to think they are. They moved through the ward in a loose group. Pritchard had a tablet and kept tapping things into it. Holloway looked at the ceiling panels, the floor, the cart positions, anything that wasn't a person. Sejin moved like he owned the building, which, in large part, he did. When they reached the section of the ward where Renee was working, Dr. Webb stepped slightly forward. It was a small movement, easy to miss. But Dana saw it. He positioned himself between Sejin and Renee like he was filling a gap, like he was making sure the space stayed managed. Renee was standing at the foot of a patient's bed, reviewing a post-op note. She looked up when the group approached. Sejin did not look at her. He turned to Dr. Webb and asked about new intake performance. How were the newer staff adjusting to the floor's pace? Were there any concerns about productivity in the first 90 days? He asked all of it to Webb, in a steady, professional tone, while Renee stood 3 feet away holding a patient chart. Pritchard glanced at her name badge. Just a quick look, eyes dropping and coming back up, like he was checking something off a list he had already made. Renee didn't move. She stood where she was, chart in hand, and waited. Her expression was neutral, open, the kind of face that gives people nothing to work with. Webb answered Sejin's questions with careful, polished language. Smooth words about integration periods and performance benchmarks and the high standards Hallmark General held for all incoming physicians. He never said Renee's name. He talked around her the way you talk around something sitting in the middle of a room that everyone has agreed not to mention. Then Sejin turned. It was brief. He looked at Renee the way you look at a chair you are deciding whether to move. Not with hostility, not with anything personal. Just a flat, measuring look that held no warmth and asked no question. Then he spoke. We'll see how the probationary period shapes up. That was it. One sentence. He had already turned back to Webb before the last word landed. The word probationary sat in the air after he said it. Renee didn't flinch. She didn't shift her weight or look down or let anything cross her face. She gave him a small, professional nod, the kind that says noted without saying anything else, and looked back down at her chart. The group moved on. Webb fell back into step beside Sejin, already talking again. Pritchard was back on his tablet. Holloway had moved ahead to look at the corridor signage. Dana watched Renee from across the station. Renee stood at the foot of that bed for another moment after they passed. Still, quiet. Then she flipped to the next page in the chart, made a note, and moved to the next room. She didn't look up. She didn't watch them go. But Dana had seen her jaw tighten for just 1 second when that word landed. Just 1 second. Then it was gone. It started with a monitor alarm. Not the slow, steady kind that means a number has drifted slightly out of range. The fast kind. The kind that cuts through everything else in the room and makes every trained person within earshot move without thinking. Room 11. Mr. Gerald Tate. 61 years old, 2 days out of a bowel resection, vitals stable as of the morning check. Renee had reviewed his chart at 7 and flagged nothing unusual. But at 11:23 a.m., his blood pressure dropped hard and fast, and the monitor on his wall started screaming. Renee was the first one through the door. The floor resident, a second-year named Dr. Park, was right behind her. A student nurse came in after that, then another resident who had been charting at the end of the hall. Renee took one look at the monitor, one look at Tate, pale, sweating, eyes half open and unfocused, and she was already moving. Someone call the attending, she said. Her voice was level. Not loud, not rushed. Just clear. Now. Park reached for his phone. 30 seconds later he looked up. No answer. Keep trying. You. She pointed at the student nurse. Give me a crash cart. You, the second resident. I need another line in his right arm, wide open. Move. They moved. For the next 22 minutes, Renee ran that room. She called every step out loud as she made it. Not for herself, but for the residents around her. So they could follow, so they could learn, so nobody in that room was standing still wondering what came next. She was calm the way still water is calm, not because nothing is happening underneath, but because the surface holds. She adjusted, she reassessed, she made decisions and announced them and moved on to the next one before the last one had finished landing. Mr. Tate's pressure came back up at 11:45 a.m. By 11:51 he was stable. His color was returning. His eyes were fully open. He looked at Renee like a man who understood, on some basic level, that something serious had just happened and that the woman standing at the foot of his bed had been the reason it went the right way. Renee checked his monitor one more time. She spoke briefly to Park about the next steps, what to watch for, when to reassess, what to document. Then she walked out of room 11, went to the sink at the end of the hall, and washed her hands. Park followed her out. He was still a little shaky. "Dr. Caldwell," he said. She looked at him. "Thank you," he said. "Just that." She nodded once. Then she picked up the next chart on the rack and went back to work. She didn't know what had happened on the other side of the building while she was in that room. Sejin's administrative office was on the 3rd floor. His operations coordinator, a precise and efficient woman named Ms. Lim, had been notified of the incident within minutes of the alarm sounding. How exactly was not clear. What was clear was that by 11:39 a.m., while Renee was still working to stabilize Mr. Tate, a formal incident report had already been drafted, reviewed, and submitted. The language was careful. It described a probationary physician intervening in an emergency situation outside her sanctioned scope of practice. It noted the absence of the attending physician as a separate concern, a footnote, not the headline. The headline was Renee. The report was on Dr. Webb's desk by noon. Dana found it there at 12:17 p.m. when she brought Webb a patient transfer form he had been waiting on. Webb wasn't in the office. The report was sitting on top of a stack of papers, face up. Dana read it in about 45 seconds. Then she looked at the timestamp in the top right corner. 11:39 a.m. Mr. Tate hadn't even been fully stable yet. Dana stood in that office for a moment. She looked at the document. She took out her phone and photographed it, the full page, the timestamp, the language, the signature line at the bottom. Then she set the transfer form on Webb's chair, walked out, and pulled the door shut behind her. She went back to the nurse's station. She sat down. She put her phone in her pocket. Across the ward, she could see Renee moving between rooms, chart in hand, already on to the next patient. Dana opened her computer and got back to work. She didn't say a word to anyone. Not yet. The 4th floor donor lounge was not a place most staff had reason to go. It was tucked at the end of a corridor that didn't connect to any active ward. A quiet, carpeted room with low lighting, leather chairs, and a small kitchen area that stayed stocked with things you wouldn't find in the break rooms downstairs. It was used for board meetings sometimes, and for private conversations with major donors when the hospital needed something from them or they needed something from the hospital. Most of the nursing staff had never been inside it. Dana had. The supply room adjoining it needed restocking twice a week, and it had been on her rotation for the past 2 years. She had a key. She knew the layout. She knew that the adjoining door, if left at a certain angle, sat open about 6 inches because the hinge was slightly warped and had been that way since the previous winter. She came up at 6:45 that evening to restock before the end of her shift. The corridor was empty when she got there. She unlocked the supply room, propped her cart outside the door, and started pulling inventory, gauze packs, fur-lined sets, a box of sterile gloves that needed to be rotated to the front. Routine work. The kind her hands could do without her brain fully engaged. She heard the lounge door open and close. She didn't think anything of it at first. She kept working. Then she heard the voice, low, relaxed, the particular tone of someone who is very comfortable in a room and very certain they are alone in it. Kong Sejin. He was on a phone call. Dana could hear only his side of it. She stayed where she was, hands on a shelf, and she listened. He was talking about the incident report. "It's the cleaner option," he said. There was a pause while the other person responded. "A direct termination right now attracts questions. Too visible. But a performance pattern that holds up. That's documented. That's a process." Another pause. He sounded like a man explaining something he had already thought through carefully to someone who needed to catch up. Dana set down the box of gloves. Slowly, without a sound. "The hire was a diversity optics decision to begin with," Sejin continued. His voice didn't change. No edge to it, no heat. He said it the way you state a fact about the weather. "I never signed off on it. It was done before I had full oversight of staffing. That's being corrected." A short laugh. Then something about timelines and the next board review. Dana stood completely still in that supply room. The cart was behind her. The shelf was in front of her. The door between the two rooms was sitting open its usual 6 inches, and through it, she could hear every word like he was standing next to her. She didn't move until she heard his tone shift, lighter now, wrapping up, the kind of voice that means a call is almost over. Then she reached into her pocket. Slowly, she opened her phone, found the voice memo app, and pressed record. She held it toward the gap in the door. Sejin was still talking, something about the operations coordinator, something about timing. Dana caught most of it. Her hand was steady. She kept her eyes on the shelf in front of her and breathed through her nose, quiet and even. The call ended. She heard him move across the lounge, the soft sound of a chair, then footsteps, then the door opening and closing again. She waited 30 seconds after the sound of his footsteps faded down the corridor. Then she stopped the recording. She looked at her phone. The memo was 4 minutes and 11 seconds long. She played back the first 20 seconds to confirm it had caught his voice clearly. It had. She put her phone back in her pocket. She finished restocking the shelf, gloves to the front, gauze packs behind, for sets on the lower rack. She closed the supply cabinet. She wheeled the cart back into the hallway, locked the supply room door, and rode the elevator back down to the 3rd floor. At the nurse's station, she sat down, opened her patient coordination log, and finished the last 20 minutes of her shift like nothing had happened. She did not call anyone. She did not tell anyone. She just sat with it, 4 minutes and 11 seconds sitting in her pocket like a stone, and she finished her work. The observer was gathering. She was not flinching. Dana didn't sleep well that night. She got home at 8, made herself a plate of food she barely touched, and sat at her kitchen table with her phone face down in front of her. The voice memo was still there, for minutes and 11 seconds. She had not sent it to anyone. She had not played it back again. She just knew it was there, and that knowledge sat in the room with her like a second person. By 10 o'clock, she was at her laptop. She told herself she was just checking a few things. Routine things. The kind of administrative loose ends that sometimes followed a day like this one. She had access to certain hospital records through her coordinator login, intake documentation, credentialing files, patient processing forms. Nothing she wasn't cleared for. She opened the system and started looking. The first thing she pulled was Gerald Tate's intake form. She had processed it herself 6 days ago when he came in for his pre-surgical workup. She remembered him, quiet man, came in alone, politely declined to list an emergency contact. The name on the form was Gerald Tate. But there was a secondary field, a privacy protection flag that got added to certain patient files at the request of a legal representative. Dana had processed enough of these to know what they meant. A flagged file meant the patient's presence in the hospital was not to be disclosed to outside parties without authorization. She looked at the legal representative listed on Gerald Tate's flag. The name of the law firm was Fashola and Associates. Dana sat back in her chair. She knew that name. Most people in the city who paid any attention to local politics knew that name. Congressman Deli Fashola had been in office for 9 years. He was the kind of politician people actually trusted, which was rare enough to be notable. His younger brother, Dana searched for a moment, scrolling through what she could find in a basic public search. His younger brother's name was listed in a 3-year-old community event article. The name in that article matched the alias on Gerald Tate's intake form. Not exactly, but close enough, once you knew what you were looking for. Dana stared at her screen for a long moment. Renee had saved a congressman's brother. In a room where she had no backup, no attending physician, and no one above her to defer to. She had made every right call in 22 minutes and walked out without knowing who she had just pulled back from the edge. And Sejan's office had filed a report against her before the man was even fully stable. Dana closed that file. She opened another one. Renee's credentialing record. This was something that had been sitting in the back of Dana's mind since the incident report. She had seen the language, probationary scope, and something about it had not felt right to her. She had worked at Hallmark General long enough to know how credentialing worked, what probationary status actually meant, and which categories of physician it applied to. She pulled Renee's intake credentialing form and read it carefully. It took her about 10 minutes to find it. There was an error in the classification field. Whoever had entered Renee's credentials during the intake process had logged her primary board certification correctly, but missed the second one entirely. Renee carried a dual board certification. She was certified in both general surgery and critical care medicine. The critical care certification was not in the system. It had not been logged. And because it hadn't been logged, the credentialing team had placed her in a standard probationary track for incoming surgical staff. But with both certifications active, Renee did not qualify for that track. She was fully credentialed under the hospital's own policy. The probationary classification was a processing error. It wasn't Renee's mistake. It wasn't even intentional, just a clerical oversight that nobody had caught because nobody had looked closely enough. The hospital's own paperwork proved she had never been probationary at all. Dana leaned back and looked at her ceiling. It was 1:07 a.m. She thought about Renee driving 40 minutes home in a car with a cracked side mirror. She thought about two little girls asleep in an apartment, not knowing that someone had been building a case against their mother before she had even finished her first month on the floor. She thought about 4 minutes and 11 seconds sitting in her phone. She closed her laptop. She sat in the quiet of her kitchen for a long time. Then she picked up her phone, and she started to think about who needed to know. The meeting request came through at 8:52 a.m. It was sent to Renee's hospital email from Dr. Webb's assistant. The subject line said administrative check-in, confidential. The time was 2 p.m. The location was Webb's office. There was no agenda listed. No indication of what would be discussed. Just the time, the place, and that one word, confidential, sitting there like a warning nobody was willing to say out loud. Renee read it at the nurse's station between patients. She read it once, closed the email, and went back to her chart. Dana saw her read it. She didn't say anything. At 1:58 p.m. Renee knocked on Webb's office door. He told her to come in. She opened the door and stopped for just a half second, not long enough for anyone to notice, but long enough to take in the room. Webb was behind his desk. Sitting to his left, in the chair closest to the window, was the HR lead. Her name was Carol Simmons. Renee had met her on her first day, during orientation. Carol had shaken her hand with both of hers and told her Hallmark General was lucky to have her. Carol was looking at the folder in her lap when Renee walked in. She did not look up. Webb gestured to the chair across from his desk. Renee sat down. She placed her hands in her lap, and she waited. Webb opened with the word concerns. He said it carefully, the way people say a word when they have practiced saying it. He talked about the incident in room 11, the crash, the resuscitation, the 22 minutes. He called it a situation that raised questions about scope and protocol. He said the word probationary twice in the first 3 minutes. Then he slid a document across the desk. It was the incident report. Renee looked at it. She read it without touching it, her eyes moving steadily down the page. The language was clean and organized. Boundary overreach appeared in the second paragraph. Outside sanctioned probationary scope appeared in the third. It made what she had done in room 11, the thing that had kept a man alive, sound like a filing error. Webb told her that given the report, and given what he called a pattern of operating beyond her defined role, the hospital was placing her on a formal performance improvement plan. He explained what that meant in careful, measured language. Documented reviews every 2 weeks. A supervising physician assigned to sign off on her decisions. A 30-day window to demonstrate compliance with probationary boundaries. 1 step before termination. Everyone in the room knew that. Nobody said it. Carol Simmons slid a second document across the desk without looking up. It was the performance improvement plan. 4 pages. Already filled out. Already dated. Renee looked at it. She did not touch it either. She asked one question. Quietly, evenly. She asked whether the attending physician's unavailability during the incident had been addressed in any documentation. Webb said that was a separate matter under review. Renee nodded. She picked up the performance improvement plan, folded it once, and placed it in the front pocket of her coat. She stood up, thanked them both for their time, and walked out. She took the elevator to the ground floor. She walked through the main lobby, past the reception desk, past the row of chairs where people sat waiting with that particular waiting room stillness, and she pushed through the front doors and stepped outside. The afternoon heat hit her immediately. It was the kind of heavy, pressing heat that makes the air feel thick. She walked to the edge of the entrance overhang and stopped there. She was not in anyone's way. She was just standing. She stood there for 3 minutes. She did not cry. She did not make a call. She did not look at her phone. She stood in the heat with her hands at her sides, and she looked at the parking lot and the street beyond it, and the ordinary afternoon moving past like nothing had happened inside that building. Then she reached up and straightened her badge. It had been sitting slightly crooked on her lapel. She adjusted it so it sat flat and level. She looked down at it for just a moment. Her name, her photo, the hospital's logo in the corner. Then she turned around and walked back through the front doors. She had patience to see. Nobody announced anything. There was no meeting called, no memo sent, no conversation that anyone could point to later as the moment things changed. It didn't work that way. It never does, when the people moving the pieces are careful and patient and have been waiting longer than anyone knew. It started with a phone call. Congressman Deli Fishola's office contacted the hospital board on a Tuesday morning. The call was routed through a senior aide and directed to the board chair's personal line, not the general office number, the personal one. The conversation was brief and polite. The congressman wanted to express his family's gratitude for the care his brother had received. He wanted the board to know, specifically, that a physician named Dr. Renee Caldwell had been responsible for saving his brother's life. He wanted to make sure that was on record. The board chair thanked the aide and ended the call. Then she sat at her desk for a while. Then she pulled Renee's credentialing file. She was not the only one. By Wednesday, 2 board members had independently requested the same file through the records office. Neither of them explained why. The records clerk who processed both requests noted later that both board members had gone very quiet after reviewing the documents. Neither of them sent a follow-up. They just went silent in the particular way that people go silent when they have found something they need time to think about. On Thursday, a compliance attorney contacted the HR department. She asked for Renee's original intake documentation, the forms from her first day, the credentialing submission, the classification records. She said it was related to a routine audit. Her tone was pleasant and professional. HR sent the documents by end of day. The Medicare billing investigation had been running quietly for 5 months. Most of the hospital staff didn't know it existed. But the legal team knew, and by Thursday evening, they were working late. By Friday, they were working through the weekend. Something in the financial disclosures had surfaced, a name that changed the shape of the whole file. Kong Si-jun's name. It appeared in a financial record tied to a vendor contract that had been flagged during the investigation. It was one connection among several. But it was there, and now people whose job it was to follow such things were following it. Si-jun felt the shift before he understood it. It was small things at first. A board member who had always been warm in passing now gave him only a nod. An email he sent to the legal team went unanswered for 2 days. A meeting he requested was politely delayed without a new date offered. He didn't know what had moved. He didn't know where to look. He just felt the temperature drop the way you feel a change in weather before the clouds arrive. The engine made no sound. It didn't need to. Si-jun chose a conference room on the 2nd floor that wasn't used for regular meetings. Small, no windows facing the hallway. A table for 6 with only 2 chairs pulled out. He was already seated when Renee arrived. There was no assistant outside the door. No board member waiting down the hall. Just him, the room, and a folder placed neatly on the table in front of the empty chair across from his. Renee came in alone. She closed the door behind her. She looked at the room once, the folder, the 2 chairs, the closed blinds, and then she sat down. Si-jun opened the meeting with her name. Then he said he wanted to have a direct conversation. He said the word direct the way people say it when they mean the opposite, when they have already decided what they want the outcome to be and have packaged it carefully before walking in. He slid the folder across the table. Inside was a settlement offer. Paid severance, 3 months. A reference letter, already drafted, with language that was generous enough to open doors at other hospitals. And a non-disclosure agreement, for pages, covering all matters related to her employment at Hallmark General. He placed his hands flat on the table after he pushed it across. The gesture was meant to look open. Reasonable. Like a man offering something he didn't have to offer. Renee looked at the folder. She did not open it. She let the silence sit. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Si-jun's jaw shifted slightly. He was not a man who was comfortable with silence he didn't create. He drew a breath like he was about to speak. Renee reached into the folder she had carried in and placed 2 documents on the table. The first was her credentialing record, the corrected version, with both board certifications listed and verified. The second was a copy of the hospital's original intake form, the one with the classification error, with the relevant fields circled in ink. She looked at him. Her voice was quiet and even. On what grounds exactly? Si-jun looked at the documents. He looked at the credentialing record first, then the intake form. He read the circled field. He looked up at her. She did not look away. He looked back down at the papers. Something moved across his face, not quite discomfort, not quite surprise. Something closer to the expression of a man who has just understood that the room he walked into is not the room he thought it was. He did not raise his voice. Neither did she. He picked up the settlement folder. He put it back in his bag. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and left the room without another word. The performance improvement plan was withdrawn before 5 p.m. The notification came through Webb's assistant in a single-line email. No explanation was given. None was needed. There was no announcement. No email to the full staff. No note on the board in the break room. No moment where someone gathered people together and explained what had happened and how it had been resolved. It just shifted back, the way things sometimes do in institutions that would rather move forward than account for where they have been. One day Renee's access badge didn't work on the ward door. Then it did again. One day her patients were listed under another physician's roster. Then they were listed under hers. On a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the meeting in the second-floor conference room, Dr. Renee Caldwell came back to work. She arrived at 6:20 a.m. Her coat was on. Her bag was over one shoulder. She badged through the ward door, hung her coat on her hook in the staff room, and picked up her patient roster from the tray at the nurse's station. She stood there for a moment, reading through it. 6 patients, 3 of them carryovers from before, 3 new admissions from the past week. She made a few notes in the margin. Then she folded the roster, tucked it into her coat pocket, and started her rounds. Nobody stopped her in the hallway to say welcome back. Nobody made a fuss. A second-year resident named Park saw her coming and gave her a nod. Firm, respectful, the kind that carries more than it shows. She nodded back. That was all. She went to work. Dana was at the nurse's station when Renee came in. She had her head down over a coordination log, a coffee going cold beside her keyboard, the particular focused stillness of someone managing 3 things at once. She looked up when she heard the badge beep on the ward door. She watched Renee cross the floor. She watched the way she moved. Not hurried, not performing anything, just present, purposeful. The way someone moves when they know exactly where they are going and have already decided to give it everything they have. She watched Renee stop at the first room on her roster, read the door chart, adjust something in her notes, and push the door open. Dana looked back down at her log. She sat with something quiet for a moment. Not quite relief, not quite satisfaction, something simpler than both of those. The feeling of watching a thing land where it was always supposed to land. She had not told Renee everything. She had passed what she found, the credentialing error, the intake form, the voice memo, to the right people through the right channels, carefully and without noise. She had not made herself part of the story. That wasn't what she had set out to do. She had just been the person in the room who was paying attention, and when the moment came she had done what that required. Renee didn't know the full shape of what Dana had done. Maybe she suspected. Maybe one day there would be a conversation about it, something brief and honest over bad break room coffee. Maybe not. It didn't need to be said to be true. Dana picked up her coffee, found it cold, and set it back down. Across the ward, Renee came out of the first room and moved to the second. She had a new chart in her hand. She was reading as she walked, making notes without slowing her pace, the way she always did. She stopped at the door. Read the chart. Pushed it open. Dana washed her hands. The gloves went on in 2 clean motions, the snap of latex, the quick press between each finger to seat them right. Then the door swung open and Renee stepped through and the door settled shut behind her. Still, steady, already on to the next one. Dana turned back to her screen. She had her own work to finish. The morning was moving and there were coordination logs to close and a shift handover in 2 hours and 6 other things that needed her attention before noon. She picked up her pen. She got back to work. And that is where Renee's story ends. A woman who asked for nothing but to do her job, who ran into a crashing room when everyone else was unreachable, who saved a man's life and walked out to wash her hands and pick up the next chart, who stood outside in the afternoon heat for 3 minutes, straightened her badge, and went back inside. She never begged. She never broke. She just kept showing up for her patients, for her daughters, for the version of herself that knew what she was worth even when the room full of suits had already decided otherwise. She didn't need anyone to fight for her. She just needed the truth to have somewhere to land. If this story hit different, if you felt every single chapter, do me a favor. Like this video. It takes half a second and it means more than you know. Subscribe if you're new here. Stories like Renee's, ones with real stakes, real pain, and real justice, drop every week. You don't want to miss the next one. And drop a comment below. Tell me where in the world you're watching from. Lagos, Atlanta, London, Toronto, Accra. Wherever you are tonight, I want to know. Because every time I write one of these, I think about you. The woman on the other side of the screen. Watching, feeling, staying until the very last word. You already knew she was going to make it. You just needed to see it happen. Thank you for that. See you in the next one.